You sent me this song, and I know it's something that you've been kind of kicking around for a while, this idea of sort of soul coughing esque spoken word over jam
Ooh,
music.
I like
But
that comparison. Yeah.
I gotta say, man, I listened to the track. It's all mastered and finished. It sounds fantastic.
Oh, dude,
The
thank you.
drumming, for I just recorded some drums recently. It's very hard. I mean, look, I'm guessing that was done by a professional. They know what they're
Yes.
doing, but it's still the drums sound really good, which is not easy to do, especially when the drums are playing a lot of stuff. And the drummer is fantastic.
Yeah. So the
And it's
drummer's
got this
name
kind of
is,
acid jazz thing going on, almost like
yeah.
psychedelic. It's just
So
going, 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 going.
dude, so I'm really proud. Like, I don't play, so I'm a musician, but I don't play on it. I just do the spoken word. But I put together like the band. And, I grew up on like Fish and the Dead and like, but also like Tool and John McLaughlin and like weird shit. And so my idea, I wanted to put together a quote unquote super group, but a fucking weird one. So all of the orchestration is this guy, Chris, from that like hard rock band Under Oath. But he also does like film scoring. The bass is
Cool.
Oteil Burbridge from Dead and Company with John Mayer, the new Grateful Dead, and Allman Brothers. But that drummer, that was like my like fucking ace. So his name's Eric Harland. He's a jazz drummer from New York, and he used to play with McCoy Tyner, Coltrane's piano player. And and he's so humble. He's such a fucking humble, cool guy, even though, yeah, like Mayer's a fan of him and Questlove and all. But he's just like the chillest dude. And we became friends on just Instagram because all of this was recorded separately. I hadn't been in a room with any of these guys. And Eric sends me the first take on that was really chill drums, just like in the pocket. I mean, tight, but like really chill. And in my head, I wanted a jazz drummer because I wanted someone to go ape shit, like crazy jazz drums.
Did he record that himself?
Yeah.
Oh, I
So
gotta
like,
get this guy's number.
dude, it
So,
was
like,
wild. Yeah. So I laid down the track almost as a poem. Then Chris did all of the orchestration over it. Then he sent the orchestration back to me. I re-recorded the vocals so I could like do it a little more with like a little more musicality. And then we just sent it to Eric. He laid down the drums. Yeah. So the first track was, or the first take was pretty chill. And then I just called him and I was like, hey, just for fun, can you do one where you go fucking insane? And he's like, all right. And then he sent back that one. And we were like, that's the one. And then we sent it to Oteil, who, channeled God and just fucking one take improvised, played over it. And then that's the track.
um, it reminds me a little bit of like a heavier Birdman soundtrack. Remember
Oh my
Birdman, the movie with
God.
Michael Keaton, which is an
Yeah.
amazing soundtrack. It's just
The whole
just
thing, it's one of
drums,
the only,
jazz drums.
that's it. That's it. I mean, this dude is literally incredible. There's one more track that's like much heavier that I can send you if you want, all about like music, and he waits till about halfway through, and then the way it kicks in is actually very Birdman-esque, like very like echoey snare, like it's just so intense. I mean, the dude is phenomenal. And that's one of the things, like I'm heavy in with stand-up right now, and I'm trying not to get my hopes up with this music project, even though the musicians that I really respect who have heard it so far really like it. But one of the reasons that playing music is such a dream of mine compared to stand-up is I love putting shit like this together. Like I love the collaboration. Stand-up's very isolating. And it's almost like the sadder you are, the more of a loner you are, the more of a fuck up you are. You kind of get revered for that because you talk about it on stage. And, with music, there's something so beautiful about lifting each other up and adding to, it's the whole yes and thing. Sometimes with comedy, someone will be like, hey, do you like Joe? And you're like, yeah, I like Joe. And they're like, oh, well, Joe just got, a TV Comedy Central special. And you go, ah, fuck Joe, But when you're playing music with someone, there's not as much, I mean, maybe you'll tell me there is, but it seems like there's not as much jealousy or animosity. Like you have to put your ego in check a little bit because you are playing with other people and you are trying to build things together and you want it to sound as cool as possible. And, this started because I kind of started to do some more spoken word sounding stand up in my act. And one day I just asked someone to jam with me and play music with me. And it made it so much more fun for me. Even if you watch me on Conan, like years ago, when I start going into this rant, I'm tapping my foot at times. Like it's always been very musical to me. So the idea of being able to take a poem or a rant or whatever and doing one with you and then doing one with a jazz drummer and then doing one, I got to open for like Talib Kweli, like doing one with like a hip hop beat or doing one with kind of maybe like a sadder, slower song. That's just so exciting for me as an artist. And then because there are also going to be some jokes in there or some like comedic lines or whatever, how can you use comedy as almost an accent, as almost like a high note in a guitar solo and not make it like jokey? Like I never wanted to do comedy music. Like, hey, you guys know that Beach Boys song? Here's a version of it if we switched
It's
out
like,
this word between us.
It's a difference between like Weird Al, which I'm not denigrating, and like, I don't know, Carlin, who's musical,
He's very musical.
Yeah. And it's a monologue. So I totally get it, man. And what you're speaking to about the collaborative nature, I mean, I actually don't get that a lot because I'm a solo artist and I do work with other musicians, but there's a big difference between on one level being completely solo and the other is like people add to your music and you're producing it and curating, mixing, which is fun. But the real fucking gem is like actually playing together.
Yes.
And then the next level gem is like playing together and improvising in the moment.
That's it.
I just did that for the first time in a long time with Peter Broderick, who's an artist. And we were in Ireland for a week, a couple weeks ago.
Whoa.
And we recorded for a week. And it just like was a flood of creativity. Like 12 songs came out in 1 week. And each one was like one take. And it was just complete like, I was like, this is such magic being able to create in the moment with music and conversation with someone in little nuance and subtlety of like little things you're doing. And the other person is just responding. And you're like, we don't have to say anything. We just
That's
know.
it.
And my God, it's such a good feeling creatively.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I always used to be embarrassed to say that like I used to, like I really like jam band music, but it was for that. It was for that. There is something so special about improv, even in comedy. Something will happen with an audience and you try to replicate it the next day by being like, oh, this guy said this last night. And like, no one really cares. It's just like, no, in that moment, you needed that time and that space and that audience and this microphone. And it just happened. And the audience knows like, oh, fuck, this is just for us. Or with what you were saying, just playing off somebody. I mean, that just happened to me for the first time in a really long time. Oddly enough, after this breakup, I did what everybody did, which is Tulsi Gabbard found me a farmhouse to stay at in Hawaii. So I flew to the Big Island and take that, Amy, who just got bangs. And they would do kirtan every morning and every night. And I'd done kirtan before, but I'd never played. And
time out here. You're telling the truth. Tulsi Gabbard hosted you in Hawaii at some kind of kirtan house. This is her thing.
She just knew people. She knew people out there.
Okay. Oh, right. She's Hawaiian. Right.
Yeah. And, well, and I'm Hawaiian too. So I was like, I'm going to get in touch with my roots and I'm going to become spiritual. And instead, all I did was text Amy. And then she said she wanted me back. And then I flew back and then she changed her mind. And it was a fucking mess. My God. Should have listened to Krishna and turned my phone off. But I didn't. Lesson learned. And so, dude, you should have seen me. I look like fucking like inside Llewyn Davis with my stupid little acoustic guitar and backpack at the airport. It was awful. And so, we do kirtan. And so the family let me play guitar. And look, I know it's supposed to be for God and no ego, but I would be lying if there weren't moments where I would just lock onto some riff because of what they were playing and because of what we were chanting and would just get so lost into it. And there'd be a moment I'd snap into it or snap back into it and just be like, oh, this is some of the most beautiful music I've ever played in my life. Have no idea. Could not tell you, could not replicate it, could not whatever. but it was just fucking, it felt so good. And when you're improvising and you don't, I'm not talking about you're sitting around a bonfire drinking like PBRs and it's like, okay, you solo, now I solo, now you. I mean, like, here's one melody that I am locking in because it is the
Oh, yeah,
right
I know.
melody to.
If anybody,
Oh,
I get it.
yeah.
I mean, do comics look at it, in an analogous way of, like, the kinda comics who totally improv? Like, I think, like, Jeff Garlin or, um, Sinbad used to be that
Yeah.
way, or versus someone who's like, "No, my set is light and tight, and it's always, highly crafted like a Seinfeld," or do people just be like, "Different styles, it's all good, just."
Everyone's different. And I remember when I was coming up, as I'm sure you did with music, you try to replicate people you look up to. So
You
I'd
do
be like,
everything.
okay, Dave Chappelle smokes weed, so I'm gonna smoke weed before I go on stage. And then I would just stare at the audience and bomb. And I was like, nope,
Yeah.
not for me. Or like Louis C.K. was known for he'd have an idea and he'd talk it out, see what hits, and then take the stuff that hits. And like, same deal. I can't do that. For me, even though I'm a podcaster and stuff, I'm a writer. I write funny. When I podcast, I mean, shit, we opened up and I'm like, I was dumped. Like, I want to talk about serious shit. I want to talk about God and heartbreak and shit like that. For me to be funny, I need to write it out. And then that actually gives me permission to improvise, because if I do a joke that's pre-written and it kills, over that laughter, I can try to improvise. Here's a tag, here's a tag, here's a tag, because I'm riding on that confidence. Um, or if I just happen to, like, I did a show the other day that was all improv. That was like the bit of the show. And it gave me permission to improvise. Like, the audience would let you go with it. And then there was some stuff there that actually did so well that I'm going to take back and try to develop into a bit. Yeah, some people are really good
Mm.
writers. Some people are really good improvisers. I think having both is important, because no matter how much of a writer I am, I'm still at a comedy club where I'm going to have to deal with a drunk guy, or I'm going to have to deal with a bottle breaking, or I'm going to have to deal with fucking up a joke. And you need to be able to have that skill to,
Yeah.
get out of it a little bit. I love improvisation. I mean, it's the coolest thing to me. And actually, this improv show I did last week showed me that I'm better at it than I thought I was. So I do want to try to do it a little more, and I'm starting to think like, yeah, I've been doing stand up 20 years, but how much of the writing stuff is a crutch because I don't want to go out into the audience? And, I love improvising music. I'm so much better at improvising music than I am like, here's a chart to play with, that I do want to do that more in stand up.
Yeah, with music, it's really similar, man. I mean, for me, I've noticed that some of the recordings I've been making lately that I like the most are the ones that were improvisations in front of a live audience. And
Yeah.
obviously the ones with ceremony where it's a medicine ceremony, that's the core of what I've been doing since the beginning. And that there's something special about when you really open yourself up to creating in the moment while it's being witnessed by others,
Yes.
which is a very, like, talk about being like out there and exposed and vulnerable. I mean, maybe that's why it has a special sauce to it, because it's so vulnerable.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always land, but when it does and it is recorded, it's quite special. And lately I've got a handful of those recordings that I'm just like, what is the difference between something in a studio that's a quite more thoughtful, and you go back to it and you tweak it and you add to it and you take things away, and that can be special too, but it can never quite be the same exact thing.
There's a reason nobody listens to the Fish studio albums, buddy. Like, you're right. It's totally that. I mean, do you ever, because this has happened to me, even just, I'll be playing guitar just with a buddy and just record it on my phone. Do you ever go back and listen to those, like those tracks recently, and suddenly a line that you play, it's your hands, comes on and it just melts you, where you go, holy fuck, that was me. Like, this is my
Mm.
thing. Almost like you're hearing it for the first time, or not like you're hearing it for the first time, but like this thing that almost seemed imagined while you were improvising it. Suddenly you listen back to it and you go, oh no, that's real. I get to make something out of that.
Yeah. oftentimes in the moment of improvising, something might feel really simplistic or not
My
that
favorite.
interesting. And then later on, I'll listen to it, and it actually is like, oh, that is so tapped into the emotional center that almost like there's another being playing it, and I'm this guy, just like this human judging it, and I'm like, oh, this is hacky.
Yeah,
But then,
yeah,
but when the hacking judge is gone, actually forgotten. I'm like, what? I don't remember doing this, and now I'm just a listener, and
yeah,
I'm a soul listening to music, and I'm like, oh, that's really touching,
yeah.
And
Well,
they're different people, they're different beings. It's like I'm in the way. I'm just trying to take away this judge that says like everything's crap, but that is art where you're trying to curate at the same time to actually make decisions to be like
right.
maybe that is hacky or and
Well,
it's a
and
dance.